Okay, well, welcome everyone to episode number 17 of All About Nothing. And I am so excited today because we're doing something really new and different, which is two things that are really new and different. One of them is we have a spectacular guest who I will introduce to you. And the other is we're going to have fun, which I'm very excited about and is not my strongest suit, unfortunately. So I have a lot to learn from our guest, Akillah Wali. And so before I introduce Akillah to you, I wanted to say one little bit of background. And that is, I was reading in one of my many neuroscience books recently. I think it was the Yuck Punkzep book, which is an old one that I really love. And one of the things that Yuck Punkzep said in this book was actually two parts to it that really struck me. One part of it is that we have a brain region that is all about joy and play. Now, my joy and play region is very underdeveloped, given that I come from a Jewish Holocaust history that's not big on either one of those. The other thing that I found so inspiring, and that was why I really wanted to bring Akillah on today, is that in the lab, in the research lab, with the lab rats, they did one incident of tickling of the rats, the lab rats, and they made the lab rats laugh their lab rat laughter. And the experience, that one incident of laughter inspired a burst of hippocampal growth. Now, the hippocampus is the part of the brain that learns and remembers, and having the hippocampus enlarge is a good thing. So I thought, wow, really good reasons to bring in Akillah, which is my next piece. I'm going to introduce her. I met Akillah at the Boston conference. She came to my workshop, and she's going to tell you what brought her to my workshop. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about Akillah, knowing that I know very little about her because I haven't known her long, but just long enough to know that she is a great resource for us. And what I learned about Akillah is not only does she have this gift of humor, which I don't have, but also she's the mother of a spectacular daughter. And I can't claim that either. And she's also a child of two activists. She grew up in the South. She calls herself a lifelong learner, a rabble rouser. She has insatiable curiosity. I have that too. She's always trying to be a better human. We certainly have that in common. And she's given herself permission not to take herself too seriously. So, in addition to her credentials as a therapist and a trauma therapist and an educator, Akillah, and this is why I brought her in today, of the many reasons, she created a model that I thought, wow, we got to get in on this, that she calls psychoeducomedy. And I thought, is that brilliant or what? Because in this trauma field, when we talk about sex, we usually talk about sexual trauma. I've been trying for 20 years to bring sexual pleasure and sexual health over to the trauma field and just starting to have some success with that. And lo and behold, Akillah brings humor to the whole endeavor. So, with that, I want to hand it to Akillah. She's going to tell you a little bit about how she arrived at this brilliant idea to bring humor to sex therapy and trauma therapy. And then she's going to give us a little bit of a sample to what she does, teaching trauma and sex therapy in this humor model of hers. So, Akillah, please take it away. And at any point, you can certainly ask me to chime in. I'll be happy to. But I'm happy to hear from you and to let the people hear from you. So take it away, Akillah.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Ruth. I really appreciate being here. I'm a little fidgety, so I'll try to keep all of my maneuvers below the camera. It's the
No
neurodivergent
need,
thing. It's
Akillah, no need. We
so
all
I
have
have these
our trauma symptoms. No need. And
like
one of the things I like to make very clear to the people, whoever will listen to me, is we don't have to be perfect to do this work. I take as given that we all have a story. We bring our story to the mix, and as long as we keep doing our own work and keep our stuff out of our clients' stuff,
Mhm.
the rest is just grist. So go ahead. No
That's
worries
very
about
true.
fidgeting.
It's that thing of how ADHD shows up in adulthood. And we're not climbing on the tabletops and putting our fingers in people's faces, but sitting still is still a challenge.
Got it.
um you know y- your reminder that it doesn't have to be perfect, and I know as clinicians we often forget that we're also human and are susceptible to the same uh needs of reassurance. But one of the things that I remind my clients of all the time is presence over perfection. Don't think about this ideal, and I'll get more into that part of it later, the ideal, sexual experience, and all these things that we've been led to believe about what it's supposed to look like through the media, which is incredibly problematic. And I do like to poke fun at how problematic it is. Um, but just to yeah, you're losing your grasp on, I don't want to say reality, but on the actual event when you are so much in your head that you're trying to orchestrate this thing. I also wanted to piggyback on something that you said earlier about humor and how that's not a strength of yours, and it certainly wasn't a strength of mine either.
Hmm.
This is definitely something that through years of self work I had to get to as a product of the American South, and as a product of this horrible history that we like to try to ignore and sugarcoat and toxically reframe. um Being lighthearted and jovial were definitely not things that were afforded to me, my family, other Americans of African descent. um and having parents who were very active in some very heavy times and heavy movements. Lighthearted was not a privilege that was afforded. um and then also through just my own journey and having to forge my own path and figure out how to do things for myself that had never been done within my family, going to college, going to graduate school, having um earning a living wage and doing so um in these environments where I never should have been in the first place, because they weren't built for me. Created a lot of, I don't know if it's inner turmoil, external turmoil. There was a lot of chaos and a lot of
Mm,
um, hard knocks to be taken. And in that space, definitely there wasn't the the space to be lighthearted and jovial and playful and all of these things. And it wasn't until the birth of my daughter, almost 10 years ago, and really allowing myself to giving myself permission to admit that I was terrified that I wouldn't know how to play with my child,
mm, mm,
that things started to I had to make a shift because
mm,
I did not want a repeat of my experience for my
mm,
child.
mm.
And so when I talk about my child and I say all of these wonderful things, and I know that this is a child without trauma, that I have protected my
Mm,
child from the trauma that my parents could not protect me from, the
mm,
historical generational aspect of it. And also, I'm not committing the same offenses that they did as parents who were not equipped to be
mm,
parents.
mm. Oh, Akila, I have to tell you, I am so moved that I have never heard a mother say anything about how important it is to be able and to become able to play with your child. That is so moving to me. And your daughter is blessed. She is blessed not only that you made that effort to learn, but you knew how important it was for you to learn, and you did that for her. What a blessing. What a blessing. And you are breaking the chain. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that with us. Sorry
I
to
figured,
interrupt you.
no, it's no, I actually, and I meant to say this earlier, I prefer dialogue. Even when I do the psychoeduc comedy, I'm not up there just pontificating.
Okay.
Mine is, it's a very interactive experience, and I warn, I always give an introvert warning for my shows and let people know that, yeah, I mean, you're going to be compelled to interact, and you do it at your own comfort. But if you thought you were just going to come sit and watch a show, you came to the wrong show.
Mm, good. Thanks. Thanks for telling me. I'm always afraid of talking too much.
Oh no, I hate talking. So um I appreciate the disruption. Not It's
All
not a
right.
disruption, it's a diversion.
Okay. You
I
got it.
appreciate the attention going somewhere else for a minute.
All right.
So where were we? I don't
Where
even
we were before I interrupted you was you were talking about your journey and
mm,
how you had to learn comedy, you had to learn how to play to be able to play with your daughter.
mm,
And you mentioned just now your shows. So
mm.
tell me about where you perform and how you perform and how that came into being.
Okay. So, and I'll back up a little bit. you mentioned learning comedy, and I know I mentioned that, I've heard for decades people are always telling me how funny I am, and it's the dry, sardonic, almost the British humor type presentation or yeah, I guess presentation is the right word. So it's not the I almost feel a little guilty calling myself. I don't call myself a comedian. I don't feel like I've earned that.
Oh,
Um, but psychoeducomedy is something that feels appropriate because it is psychoeducation. It is comedic. Um, and I am performing. But yeah, we all had time to overthink things during the quarantine portion of the
oh
pandemic.
yeah. And I'll tell you something, Akila. I'm not a fan of labels of any kind. So you can call yourself whatever you want or not anything, and you do what you do, and what you call it or don't call it really doesn't matter very much to me.
Good. Okay, good. Well, and as a just throwing it out there, I also do not prefer labels, and don't tend to I don't tend to use them for myself. I'm a person that goes up and does a thing occasionally. Um, and people show up to watch that. But, I actually now that I'm thinking about the timeline, I completed um the criteria for the ASECT sex therapy, sex educator certification during that quarantine time period.
Mm,
And, my I think for so many of us, we go into certain lines of work as therapists in ways that are a little bit selfish.
I
I'm a
don't know
trained
if I would
therapist for a
use that word. Selfish is a very critical, judgmental word. Peter Levine calls it me search.
Okay.
He says most of us, our research begins with me search.
Research.
That's not selfish. That's, eternal curiosity and wanting to get my own stuff out of the way so I can be of service. So that is anything but selfish.
Okay.
And I'm
I'll take that.
sure,
I love a reframe.
Akila, if you're interested in having a good sex life, I don't think you're unique in that, but the problem is no one talks about it. So you
Right.
can wonder, am I the only one that is thinking about this? So
Right. Well, and so much it's so much more than even just having a good sex life. It's this idea that this is a part of ourselves that this society does not allow us to pay any attention to and to nurture in any way. And I was doing parts work before I realized it was parts work, and talking about the fragmented lives we live and how we're never going to be fully actualized or even content humans until we reconcile all of these parts of ourselves. And sexuality and humor and lightheartedness and all of those things kind of live together. And when you see these people who just are not happy, they're not able to engage with that part of themselves, that's that's a problem.
ugh. And the tragedy, too, is that no one talks about it. So they don't know it's okay to talk about it, and they don't know what other people are doing. And so they think there's something wrong with them, but they don't know it's okay to ask or to tell because no one's talking about it
Right, right.
except us.
So that's why I decided to get on stage and do it. Um, yeah, so once the quarantine part of the pandemic lifted, I found out through a friend who happens to be a stenographer by day and a was at the time a burlesque performer at night.
Oh, wow.
And I'm an introvert that meets a lot of people because I'm very, they call it a shiny introvert. I'm very
Oh,
charismatic, curious, and can, get out there and do the thing, but I will shut down for 3 days after I've done it.
you fooled me.
Uh, I fool everybody. People at work are like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "I'm pretty sure I know who and what I am." So yeah. But I went to this show, and it's a format called Words with Nerds. So it's like a
Mm.
TED Talk. People have presentations playing behind them, slides or whatever, but it's funny. And so it's this, you're learning something, and it's whatever people geek out on. Um, And she knew that I was interested in doing that based on kind of wanting to find a way to do a mass offloading of all of this information that I had, received through the certification process. And so she introduced me to the producer, Sasha, and Sasha asked, she's like, what would you talk about? I'm like, oh, probably, something sex related and, starting with how everything that we learned as kids is wrong. And Sasha looked at me and said, yes, do that. And before I got home from the show, she had sent a direct message and she asked me, she's like, can you perform in August? It was July.
Oh, wow.
I guess so.
Mm.
Sure, I'll put it in, because in my head I'd already constructed this thing. So it was just a matter of putting it on paper. And of course, there's a little extra dopamine rush that I got from her acceptance and enthusiasm for the topic. And so it should have been August, but then I got COVID, so I ended up performing in September.
Mm.
And have done a few of the Words with Nerds type shows, and then just recently, well, I guess it was last year, um, was asked if I wanted to do a different format.
Oh,
And this is a show that we now call the Birds and the BS.
wow.
And this
That's
is a
cool.
panel discussion with me, and so far it's been three comedians, and we'll get up
Oh,
and talk about certain aspects of things we've done. The first one was more like an overview of the syllabus, where I just kind of threw too much information at people, and um, the second one was kind of diving a little bit more into. I want to say it was kind of diving into kink, but it was more of a you're kinkier than you think.
mm.
And how do you find ways to lean into that? And how do you do things on the cheap? What are things that you can do by going to the dollar store instead of going to the adult toy store? A plastic ruler has a great sound to it.
Mm.
Um, and I'm working on some upcoming shows, sexuality and disabilities and aging and
Wonderful.
whatever
Wonderful.
else. Um, because it's been a good showing. People drove through a blizzard on Valentine's Day for the last one,
Wow.
which I had actually I had COVID again, and I had
Oh,
just tested negative the day before, and I was like,
mm.
okay, I can do it. And so we went and did that that show. It was,
Mm.
but there were people in the parking lot by the time I got there, and I was like, well, okay, if they can show up for this, then I can show up for this. Let's go.
Mm.
But it's
Mm.
it's obviously very needed and very much appreciated, and people enjoy it. And I have fun doing it.
Sounds great. So let's have some.
it's hard to do it without an audience, but
You have an audience.
we do
We
have an
just
audience, but
can't see them. And
right.
Akila, the thing about neglect is, and this is what we have to learn about neglect, we can't necessarily see what's there,
Mm,
but it's there.
very true.
So we know these people are there, even though we
Correct.
can't see them. And I know it's hard for me to believe, too, that there's anybody out there because we can't see them. But I know that there are because they write to me.
Mm,
Write to me, and maybe they'll write to you. If anybody writes to me, I'll tell them to write to you. So you will know that even if we can't see them,
right.
they're there. So and I'm
Mm,
here and I can see you.
very true.
So
Very
go
true.
ahead.
Yeah, and I guess I misspoke a little bit. It's more
No,
about,
no, it's okay. It's okay.
not having the crowd in front of you and getting that immediate feedback.
And even Bruce Springsteen, I've heard him say in shows before, is there anybody alive out there?
Yeah.
So go ahead. I'm listening.
So, yeah, so the first show I ever did was called Sex Miseducation, and how everything we learned was incorrect, is incorrect. And so I ask, how, where people learned about sex, how they learned about sex. Was it through the magazines you found underneath your parents' mattress? Did you learn it at school? Did you learn it at church? Um, which all of these places are problematic for one reason or another. I learned in Central Florida, so we'll just leave it there in the 80s. So yeah, I just kind of take a temperature for, where people learned, and kind of what their baseline is going to be for the information that they're gonna get. And I also, and this is the interactive part again, because I need I need to be fed while I'm on the stage, or I will run away. Uh,
Oh, so tell me what you need, Akila. I'll help you.
so No, so no, I'm just, for the show, one of the things that I always say is, like, if I say anything that even sounds slightly like an innuendo, I want you to shout at the stage, you know, that's what he said, that's what she said, that's what they said. So it's constant chaos throughout the show, which my brain understands very well. Um, and it's a way to keep people involved. It's a way to, have them kind of hang on to every word. It's a way to give people permission for saying the things out loud that they've always wanted to say in those instances. How many of us have been in a meeting where somebody has said something where you want your inside voice to become the outside voice, but you don't want to earn a trip to HR? So this is that space that gives people permission, um to kind of to practice going there. I do another thing where I have people close their eyes. And it's like, no, everybody has to close their eyes, otherwise this will get really weird, because I'm gonna have you imagine your ultimate sexual experience. you know who's with you, is somebody with you, what's the lighting like, are there, identifiable smells in the room, kind of walking them through it in that way. What do you see, what do you smell, what do you taste, how are you occupying the five senses? Do you occupy, or do you call on the five senses? um and then I have them sit in that for a little bit, and then I tell them, okay, so now I want you to think about your actual sexual experiences, your average sexual experiences. And I remember the first time I did that, I actually heard somebody just kind of groan in the audience. They were like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that'll happen." But what's the disconnect?
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well, now we know that we know of a point to kind of work on or work through for you. Um, I let's see. I mean, that's a small taste. I don't know how much. Oh, and I talk about let's see. Since I'm already talking about permission, it's that thing of the imagery that we were bombarded with as we were coming of age and who we were being shown to have permission to be sexual beings. Who were these people? And were you represented in those people?
Mm.
We were taught cis, het, white, young, thin, able bodied
And
people.
usually not married. Old, not old, but any married people, how often do you see a married couple having sex in a movie? You see
Right.
people having affairs, you see people meeting and starting out, you see
That's
people
very true.
breaking up with their spouse, but happy, sexual, married people? No.
No, no, and I hadn't thought about that one. But yeah. And what
Yeah.
does that do? What does that do to a person?
Well, it makes you think that if you're a married person, that it must be boring or it's not worthy of being, on a big screen because it's only hot if it's illicit or new or, anything that's,
Slightly non-consensual, slightly.
everything that
Either
I'm
is or it
not,
isn't. Yeah.
everything that isn't me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Akila, what did your parents tell you, if anything?
Absolutely nothing. Well, no, that's not true. That's not true. I grew up under a very shame-based lens as a black woman, as a Southern black woman, as a woman who is the product of slavery. I will say that now. I can say that now because 23% of my DNA is European.
Oh,
23. That's a grandparent, essentially. I've met grandparents, great grandparents. The shades get lighter as we go back.
and the white parts of you most likely
We're
were
not
not
consensual.
happy. I mean,
No,
the whoever was on the other side of that relationship that
right.
wasn't the white person
Right,
was
because they're not
probably
showing, yeah, they're not showing up in these partnered unions in my family tree research that I've been
exactly.
doing for
Mm,
decades. And so, and then, if my mother ever sees this, Lord, she's gonna have a fit.
mm.
Whatever. Story needs to be told. You know, there are histories within well, of the generations that I have interacted with, histories of their own sexual trauma.
Of course.
And so that legacy was then passed on to the the females or the people born as female in the current generations. And so it was very shame based. It was very guilt based. I mean, I told you the story um when we were sitting on the couch after your breakout session of just the level of misinformation that was being given at that time, and two, the fact that I was then being accused of improprieties
Mm,
because I had asked this question,
mm.
which was actually a very natural when I got into the trying to have a child era, I was like, oh, well, that's actually cervical mucus. And that's actually how I know that this is the time to get pregnant or to try to get pregnant.
Mm,
This is a natural function that is going on, not some punishment for, exploring my sexuality as I should have been able to do at that age.
mm, yeah.
So yeah, guilt and shame, and as a trauma therapist, I see that pattern a lot.
Well,
Guilt, shame,
yeah. And I
get to the
have a
neglect
couple
part.
of questions that come to my mind as I listen to you. One of them is, many of us who have child sexual abuse ourselves, speaking for myself, I my abuse started when I was 5, something like that. So my sexuality was kind of supercharged
Yeah.
right from the start. And as is often the case with children, when there's early sexual interaction of any kind, the little body is not equipped to contain that much stimulus. It's too much energy, so that little body's just kind of overwhelmed with sensation. So the physical and the mental and emotional confusion about all of it informs one's early sexual development. And I wonder if you encounter that too, and if you have found ways to bring humor to that, or because I know when I first started my sex therapy training, and I heard one of these seasoned sex therapists say, the reason why we become sex therapists is because we think about sex 24 hours a day. So we might as well get paid. And so I thought, oh, wow, I guess I'm not the only one who, since I was, very, very young, I was kind of preoccupied.
Hmm.
So I wonder, and this question has two parts to it. Um, One of them is where you kind of how you work with that with humor in your work, and also as a mother, what you recommend in terms of when you begin talking to your child, particularly a female child, not only about the sort of cautions about don't touch me there and consent and all that, but when do we start talking to them about sexual information more on the pleasure and health side of the spectrum, or what your thoughts are about that?
Okay. Um, so yes, to the first question, I do see that quite a lot, particularly with people with penises, who have experienced childhood sexual abuse
Yeah.
because it is so much more common for them to have experienced, arousal, you know, to the point of orgasm or ejaculation. Um, and having to then uncouple this idea that, well, I orgasmed, so I must have enjoyed it.
All
And
kinds of genders have that experience. Like,
hmm
oh my God, I must have enjoyed it. I
hmm
must have brought it on myself.
right. I happen to see it more commonly with males, but I do, or people with penises, but I do and have heard that from um, the clients with vulvas as well. But I have a couple of clients that are coming to mind right now, and they happen to have penises. And I just tell them, Well, that was your first sign that your body's working properly. It was introduced to a stimulus and it reacted in the way that it is supposed to react. The circumstances around that were kind of a trash sandwich, but you know, you were hungry, so you ate it, and we had to move on from there. So yeah, a lot of my language is very, I'm not stuffy. There's
Oh,
nothing
it's
about me that can
beautiful. I
be
love
stuffy.
it. Love it.
Um,
Love it.
Profanity, silly. I use a lot of metaphorical, and that's the neurodivergent ADHD brain. I speak in a lot of metaphor. Um, and it's always metaphors that are directly related to some aspect of the client. I use a lot of military type
Mm, mm.
references for my veterans. If I have athletes and I know what sport they played, then I'll use those kinds of references. And because I have ADHD and I've kind of studied everything, I have a lot to pull from.
Mm.
Um, but I try to just kind of incorporate humor in the delivery of the message. Um, and I know that, there are people that say, oh, well, you're what's the big argument for oh, it's like, oh, well, you're what is it that they say about people who use humor? They're trying to
Cover up or avoid.
yeah, they're trying to distance themselves from the thing by using humor. I'm like, but we're staying in the thing. I'm using the humor so that we stay here. We're not running from it.
And
But
what's wrong with fun?
what I'm doing is I'm taking the power away from this experience by poking fun at it
Yeah.
and
What
by
a
giving
blessing.
the client a way to look at it and think about it other than the way that they've had to think about it by themselves for all of these years, because Lord knows they could never tell anybody about it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, what advice do you have for parents, Akillah?
uh well, I mean, first and foremost, meet the kid where they're at. As soon as they are at the age where they're no longer engaging in parallel play and they start engaging with other kids, they're going to have questions. My kid who is biracial, we had a lot of questions about hair type and skin tone and all kinds of things. Really, she was 3 years old and she said, Mommy, my whole world is white because I live in Wisconsin. And it's like,
Mm,
we got to change that. So we got on a plane and we went to North Carolina and we visited my family
mm.
because she needed a perspective shift, you know. And it's the same thing with the body. They're going to start to notice that they have different body parts. Oh, my arms are longer, or they're they have thicker legs, or this, that, or the other. And or what's this? And Mommy, what's this? When they point to a part of the body that you don't normally see all the time. And so you just very matter of factly tell them what it is.
So, you wait until they ask, or
You don't have that much time to wait. You don't have as much time as you think. So yes.
because, well, you probably create an environment where it's safe and there's
Mm,
permission to ask. Because certainly in my family, well, of course, when there's neglect, there's no one to ask
yep.
and no one to tell. And
Hmm.
also, and this is something I have such strong feelings about, because we live in a world where nobody talks about sex, meaning even therapists, most therapists don't bring it up, don't ask, like even couples therapists don't ask their clients, so how, what can you tell me about your sexual life? Many people have come into couples therapy with me who have been in couples therapy many times before. No one ever named it, no one ever asked. People who go to psychiatrists, they get antidepressants medication. The psychiatrist didn't tell them, this medicine is going to knock out your libido.
Yeah.
So you can say goodbye to your depression. You can say goodbye to your orgasm too. Is that a deal you want to make? Well, maybe not if you knew you were making it, but they weren't told. So the fact that no one's talking, that you can tell I get really heated about this. People think either it's not okay to ask, it's not okay to not know, they're supposed to know, or,
Mm-hmm.
there's something wrong with me that I even have the question. And so they don't say a word. And you probably know this. I always say it that, ASEC, the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, has a hotline. Most, if not 90% of the questions that they get on the hotline are, is it normal? Is it normal that this? Is it normal than that? My partner wants to do this. Is it normal? What the hell is normal? No
Mm-hmm.
one knows. There is no normal, but they don't know it's okay to ask. So
Mm-hmm.
your daughter has the blessing of having a parent. I don't know about her other parent, but one parent at least that she can ask or that she can tell. Most of us don't have that. And we live in a world, especially now, where there's probably no sex education in school anymore. If there is, it's abstinence only, or this new, well, at least as of the Elon Musk days, which are now almost gone. Um, Actually, they are gone. But Elon Musk was on this pro-natal JAG, which is have as many kids as you can. All that being said, there's a poverty of sex education in
True.
schools, in public schools. So, where do kids get the courage to ask?
Yeah.
Your daughter's lucky.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's you talk about sex education. I call what I got the fire and brimstone sex ed. 'Cause it was all about, you do this and you're going to hell and all of this other
Mm,
stuff. And it was all about fear and, oh, if you have sex, you'll get pregnant, or you have sex, you'll, this is what gonorrhea looks like. And just the things that are really off-putting and shame-based and negative about something that should not be seen as negative. Um, well, how do kids get up the courage to ask by the adults doing the work? You, the adults, we have got to get a handle on whatever our hangups are, or the kids aren't going to ever be able to ask.
mhm, mhm,
I think about when you said, how do kids get up the courage to ask? They have it. We don't have the capacity to handle the questions
mm.
as adults because we haven't done our own work.
Yeah, yeah.
I would not be able to answer those questions for my child had I not done the work.
Yeah, that's so, so important for all of us who do any kind of psychotherapy, but especially around trauma, neglect, sexuality. We have to do our own work because if not, we contaminate the experience and the development and, everything for the other, everything. I wanted to say one more thing. We probably need to wrap up. I could talk to you all day, but not that long ago, I one of my issues is I don't sleep much, which means that I listen to late night radio and I hear some marvelous programs on BBC. And there's a wonderful show on BBC. I don't know when it's on. I just kind of catch it by luck, usually 2 or 3 in the morning. And it's called People Fixing the World. And
Hmm.
I heard this one woman, I think she was from Kenya, and she has a website yeah, I think it's a website called The Spread. And she basically reaches women, primarily women all over the world and educates them about sexuality and everything, sex related for women. And she talked about, and this is the 21st century, that there are women in the world now. And I'm not only referring to women with female genital mutilation, but women in general in some countries in the 21st century who didn't know that women are even supposed to have pleasure in the sexual interaction. They thought it was only for their, you know, male partner to have pleasure, and that their job was to make babies and to be available as much as the male counterpart wanted. They didn't even know that there was a category for female sexual pleasure. That's shocking. And it's shocking to us because we have the privilege to live in a country where we have more information and more permission than that. But she's educating women. Now you add to that female genital mutilation that really does interfere with women having sexual pleasure. And actually, what I learned from that show is women with female genital mutilation can even be taught how to have pleasure in the sexual experience, which was news to me. Anyway, the spread, it's a really interesting, wonderful resource, and
Hmm.
I recommend that. But I guess I wanted to sort of name it that we have a certain amount of privilege in this country, even with all the ways that we are limited and all the trauma and all the history that we have, that we
Hmm.
also have an advantage over some people in this sorry world. And the more we can educate, and now with the internet, and who knows, Akila, I get email from people all over the world that log on and see what we're doing. So you don't know who all you're reaching, and neither do I, but I hope you all out there will let us know if you're in some place where, there is that poverty of information and we're reaching into the dark, sort of secret places in the world. One
Hmm.
last thing I'll say, and then I want to see if you have any last things you want to say. But I had the good fortune where I grew up in the 60s and 70s. I'm an old lady. And so I came up in the free love generation. And also we had just gotten the pill and the
Hmm.
new sort of feminism of the 70s. And one of my heroes is a sort of a sex therapist. She's now passed, but Betty Dodson. And Betty Dodson, back in the 70s, she was a very sexual woman herself. And when the first woman-owned woman feminist magazine came out in the 70s, which was Ms. Magazine, Betty
Hmm.
wrote an article because she was really interested in getting the word out there about the female orgasm and how women could have pleasure in sexuality too. This is the 1970s in the USA. So Betty wrote an article, it was about 17, 18 pages long, and she was an artist. She always was an artist, but at the time she was a starving artist, but she was very interested in sex in her personal life and in her sort of budding professional development. And so Betty wrote this article about female sexual pleasure, and she submitted it to this brand new feminist magazine called Ms. And she got a letter back, and she said, "We'd be happy to publish your article, Ms. Dodson, but we've edited it down." So basically, they cut it down from 18 pages to about 1.5 pages. And Betty thought, hmm. So she said, "Okay, I'll let you run it under one condition. At the end of the article, we have a little sort of add-on that says, if you would like the full unedited version of this article, please send $2 and a self-addressed stamped envelope," and she gave her address. Well, this is 1970 something. Betty, within the first week, got about $20,000 in $1 bills of women who wanted to read the whole thing. So there was definitely interest. So we've come a long way in some ways, as the old Virginia Slims commercial used to say. But so I'll leave it at that. And Akillah, what would you like to leave the people with today?
Um, I have two final, I think it's two. It might be more. Who knows?
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
Um, the first point is just kind of a gentle challenge to your notion of we have a certain privilege in this country to associate pleasure with sex. We all don't. Hopefully that has changed for the younger generations, but for American women of African descent who have a legacy tied to slavery and were used purely for breeding
Hmm.
and nurturing, we don't, I don't know that that statement can be made.
Thank you, Akillah. I needed that because I have a lot to learn, and I have a lot to learn from people like you. So thank you for making the challenge and making the correction. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
And I
Oh,
know it's true. I know it's true what you're saying.
yeah.
And it was a bad mistake on my part.
Well, I mean, it was a learning point. You know,
Thank you.
we have to share these, you know, these ideas and these and the what's the word? We have to let people know where we are so that they know how to help us get to where we want to be. And so that was just me taking an opportunity
Thank you. And
to
I thank you for all my, you know, for all the peeps that are watching today because that is a really important correction. And I need that. And I'm humbled by it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And the other point, when you were talking about, you know, even women who have gone through genital mutilation are able to learn that about, you know, how about sexual pleasure and that that is something that is available to them. And you know, the first thing that comes to mind for me, and it's one of the things that I talk about a lot, is, you know, pleasure, sexual pleasure, and a good sexual experience does not necessarily mean you had an orgasm.
That's right. I definitely agree with
What else
that.
can you do that would make that pleasurable? How are the other ways that you are interacting with whomever you're with that bring pleasure into that experience?
Absolutely.
If you happen
And
to have an orgasm at the end, great. If
and
not,
many people never do. And also, as we age, in midlife and beyond, we can't always count on being as orgasmic as we always were. And people have to grow into that. And it doesn't mean, your sex life is over or your relationship is doomed. No,
no.
you're absolutely right. And we have to teach that too. Absolutely.
Do you know how
Thank
many
you for,
menopausal and perimenopausal women I have on my caseload that we are having some very interesting and much needed conversations?
thank God that they are able to have those with you. Because how many psychotherapy clients or simply humans in the world do not have anyone to talk to about that? That's another strong feeling that I have. Nobody talks about aging,
Yeah.
the
Well, and
aging body.
right. And to do it, and again bringing the humor back into it, it's like, I talk about, menopausal age. Like, yeah, you're going to turn into the Sahara Desert. You're going to be hot all the time and
Mm.
drier than you've ever been. And that is what it is. And then this is where we now know we are working from. And
But
so
you
how
know
do we work from
something?
here?
When you get some, take a tip from an old lady. When you get some distance from the whole thing, where your period's a long ago history, and so are the hot flashes and the experiences of high menopause, and you're just sort of settled into post-menopause, it's wonderful. I can't lie about it. It's wonderful. So, you've got that to look forward to. And other things about aging are not as fun, but that's a good one.
Right. Yeah. But also, I have that to look forward to, but I'm not going to piss away the days that I have now.
No, do
I
not.
We
Do
still have
not.
to find ways to enjoy where we are right now.
Thank you. That is a great way to end our show. And I can tell all the people that we all have a larger hippocampus thanks to you. So, Akillah, thank you so much for joining us today. I am so thrilled and grateful to have met you at the conference and that you came on today and shared with us and muscled through your whatever it was that you felt about coming on. And it was wonderful talking with you. So, thank you. Anything else you want to say before we end?
Oh, just thank you for having me. Would never have thought that I would be doing something like this from, going up and having a little chat with you after a massive, massive conference and production that was. I mean, this is.
And so, Akila, where can the people find you if they want if they want more of you?
Oh, so yeah, right now, nowhere. I mean, I don't like the socials. I'm horrible at
I
self-promotion,
understand.
and so I'm not on the platforms.
Okay.
Only, maybe one day we'll get there. We're
Well,
working on
you're there today, and you're always welcome to come back.
it. I appreciate it.
Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us today. It was a treat, and I really had fun. So thanks a lot, Akila, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.